Okay.
Yeah, I'll do that, and then I can control it. Yep.
Okay.
Are you in
Allison,
Raj's office today, Steph? Where are you?
Sophie's.
Sophie's, okay.
I think we're good to go.
All right, so I'll call the joint Eagle Cliff and Cove Bay Water System meeting to order. I'm Councillor Morrison. I'm going to chair just because we have two committees meeting, and so we got a neutral third party chairing. Does anybody have anything to add to the agenda? And staff doesn't have any late items, so would somebody please move that the Eagle Cliff Cove Bay Water System Local Advisory Committee approve the agenda and late items agenda for the February 26, 2021 meeting?
So moved.
Do we have a seconder? Thanks, Tim. All in favor? Okay. Ian, did you vote yes?
Yeah, how do I vote? Just
You can
verbally
just
or?
stick
Your hand up,
stick your
that's fine.
hand up. It's
Okay.
easiest,
Yeah.
I think, at this point.
That's why I did that, to show I'm not voting.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, do we have
Alice-
any public comments from anybody?
Allison, I'll just chime in here for a second. I just heard back from Carla. She said she's going to listen to us on her phone. She's got two screaming kids behind her right now.
Okay, all right. No public comments, so we're right into new business. And that's Glen and Patrick. Patrick, do you want to say any introductory remarks or?
Sure, just quickly recap on how we've gotten to this point. There's, the providing water to municipal system users is an essential service that, there's a certain standard level of service that should be expected that isn't being met in Eagle Cliff or in Blue Water. And that's something that's urgent to address. We looked into options that involved upgrading the existing system, the existing reservoir site, adding treatment and distribution upgrades, and then also connecting to the Cove Bay system, where the new water treatment plant, we're about a month away from starting commissioning of that facility. That was identified back in the summer of 2020 as a preferred approach. We subsequently applied for Investing in Canada Infrastructure Grant, the Rural and Northern Community Stream, for what we'd estimated as the cost of those works. That was done in October. We expect to hear about that maybe not until next October, hopefully sooner. And in the meantime, we issued a request for proposals to hire a consultant team to work through the options with us and develop concept designs, and then subsequently move on to the detailed design and getting improvements implemented for the Eagle Cliff Cove Bay system, as well as other systems on the island. We hired Urban Systems in the fall. They proceeded with the first phase of and completed the first phase, looking at options and concept designs that Glen's going to share a summary with everybody to start us off in this meeting. Glen?
Great, thanks, folks. I'm just going to share my screen here, so bear with me for a moment. I trust that everybody can see a nice bright red screen. Good. Well, thanks very much. Patrick did a great job of setting context here for us, so I'll skip through the first couple of slides fairly quickly, but I'm really here to discuss making sure that both the Cove Bay users as well as Eagle Cliff have a sustainable water supply moving forward. And oops, I gotta move my cursor, bear with me, there you go. Patrick's already done a great job of talking about the importance of water supply and as an essential service. So I'll skip through this slide. That's just repeating that. Although maybe I'll just pause here quickly on the last two bullets here. And one of the things we wanted to emphasize is that right now, the focus is on identifying what's the best solution, both from a resource management perspective and an infrastructure perspective. In doing so, costs are certainly a consideration, and I'll be speaking to those, but that's different than a finance strategy and the governance aspect. So what we want to do first is hopefully reach consensus on the best solution, and then further work will be required in terms of figuring out a financial strategy and a governance that suits that solution. Just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the existing Eagle Cliff Reservoir on Cartner Creek. It's approximately 10,000 cubic meters in size, and that includes its freeboard area, so that would be kind of top of the dam. In 2020, provincial representatives came out and met with Patrick on site and reviewed the reservoirs, and they deemed it a significant consequence dam and felt that significant upgrades would be required to satisfy that requirement. However, what works are required. Everybody, I think, is knowing that there's some leaks that are occurring, but the leaks have not been specifically identified. So right now, there's been no assessment of the dam in terms of determining what kind of costs would be required to bring it up to standard. So that's a big unknown. There's been conversation and some cost estimates done towards potential lining of the reservoir to resolve the leaking, but there's many challenges associated with doing that, both logistically in terms of maintaining service to the community, and is costly in itself. There's
Glenn, sorry to interrupt for
Yeah.
just a second. Steph, as a matter of housekeeping, I got a note from Carla saying she's waiting. For some reason, she can't get into the meeting by phone.
Good.
Are we good to go now, or am I still waiting?
Steph?
Have we lost Deb?
No, I'm here. She's been led in the room. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think we can continue on and she can enter as she does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steph.
Climate, we're talking about the potential adequacy or inadequacy of the existing reservoir, and we do know that climate impacts are a bit of a concern, aside from the immediate leaking that is there. The other one is also uncertainty around water quality treatment. Vancouver Coastal Health has expressed some concern and raised the issue of water quality for some time. Last year, they raised it again due to the fact that it's an unprotected open watershed and reservoir. They're willing to let things go near term, but turbidity is a particular one of concern for them. And as we've experienced, when the water level drops in the reservoir, turbidity goes up. And that's one of the items that Vancouver Coastal gets concerned with. So they have, and then there is the possibility that if the open reservoir is maintained, that advanced treatment requirements may be necessary. We recognize that the current system, and many studies have been done in the past to recognize that Eagle Cliff in particular is not achieving fire flow at the moment. There's some uncertainty exactly where the water supply line runs, and to our knowledge, that water main is not protected in legally secured right of way. So there's a number of issues that exist with the existing reservoir and its ability to provide sustainable supply. Just more of some fun facts as we start comparing and looking at Cove Bay relative to Eagle Cliff. The watershed area, Grafton Lake, as we all know, is this water supply for Cove Bay. And it's got a watershed area of approximately 0.87 hectares per connection, compared to Eagle Cliff's at 0.34. And more importantly, perhaps, is the storage component, where Grafton Lake is able to store about 395 cubic meters per connection, compared to Eagle Cliff's at 92. So there's a stark difference in terms of relationship of the supply, watershed, and storage between the two communities. When we start looking at sort of the interface area between Cove Bay and Eagle Cliff, the blue shading or gray, depending on what it looks like on your screen, represents the service boundaries for the respective areas. To the north is, or the top of the figure is Eagle Cliff, and to the south or bottom is Cove Bay. And we've got this space in the middle that is unserviced by a municipal system, and simply in the report referred to this as the Scarborough area. There's 115 properties there that is being considered in the study. Next, it's important for us to consider future changes in water demand, and there's two aspects to that. One is community growth, and I'm starting here with the near-term growth in Cove Bay. And we've worked with municipal staff to identify all the different projects that are underway or about to get underway, and identified a population equivalency to those. And so near term within the Snug Cove area, there's expected to be in the order of 268 equivalent people joining the system, with an additional 22 people equivalents joining for some commercial and institutional type facilities, the medical center, community center, and the new fire hall. Longer term within Cove Bay, there are a series of residential growth areas that are potential. And again, no application has been made for these, but in working with municipal planning staff, these are potential of an additional 592 residential people in the general Snug Cove Gates Hill area. And then there's development being proposed adjacent to the Grafton Lake, which in itself, adding them all up with a series of different land uses, would total about 566 people. And the column on the far right says revised population with 3 people per unit. So the population column, the second to the right, is based on current census data, which for residential properties is about 2.5 people per unit is what we have been applying. But the municipality does permit secondary suites, and the uptake of that across island is not known, but it was just agreed that for single family residential properties, we bump that up to 3 people per unit. So there's a slight adjustment to account for that long-term potential. Then we get into the parameters that govern system sizing. So there's a number of factors. We start with the number of, again, we're looking at both near-term and long-term. So first column is talking about within these different areas. I've broken it down to look at Cove Bay total, and then Cove Bay Zone 3, and I'll explain what the Zone 3 is in greater detail, but essentially The area that we're talking about in Cove Bay has a dedicated reservoir and booster pump that services it. And if there was a connection made with Eagle Cliff, it's this zone 3 area that would govern. So I've identified it separately. And then I've identified the Scarborough area, this area in between the two communities that is currently unserviced, and then Eagle Cliff itself. Number of connections, and I did want to highlight that for those that are keeping track of numbers, the Cove Bay numbers has been converted into an equivalent single family connections. So this isn't the true number of connections. There's lots of commercial and institutional, but it's much easier if I work in single family equivalents. So that's been converted. So there's significant potential growth in many of the communities. In terms of potential growth within Eagle Cliff, there's, according to records, our records, 110 current connections, but it's noted there that 41 potential in the future. And this is just in, again, communication with planning staff. This is what current zoning would allow. There are some properties that could subdivide, could have a second residential unit on them. So we've accounted for that potential growth. So getting beyond the number of connections, we then get into average day demand, which is a key parameter that we work with. Cove Bay, because of the varied uses, high degree of restaurants, etc., the Cove Bay has a higher average annual demand, daily demand than many of the other systems. So accounting for what we refer to as unaccounted for water. So, you know, the 200 and there's a certain level of water which we know gets consumed by users, but no water system is completely tight. So there's always some amount of loss. And we've agreed with the municipal staff to apply 15%. So that 15% is included in these values that I am presenting. So Cove Bay, we've agreed to use 250 liters per capita per day, whereas the residential or the zone 3 portion of Cove Bay, the Scarborough area and Eagle Cliff, we've used a base value of 180 liters per capita per day, which multiplied by the number of connections give us a total volume in cubic meters per day. But then allowing for the future, we've got a future ADD or average day demand, and you can see that there's an increase, and that's for two reasons. One is the municipality does promote or allow for secondary suites. So their population could go up over time, as well as also accounting for some climate change. The research and data clearly shows that water consumption goes up as temperatures rise, and one of the outcomes of climate change projections is that temperature is going to increase. So we've also increased the usage. So then reservoir sizing is based on a maximum day. So the average day is, if you took the total consumption and divided it by 365 days a year, you get the average day. But then maximum day is during high usage, generally in summer. And we use a 2.5 multiplier, which is within the municipality's design standard. So it gives us a new number. And then peak hour is also associated with other design parameters, but it's kind of irrelevant at this point for what we're talking about today. Fire flow requirements, Cove Bay proper, largely the communal area, or sorry, commercial area within Snug Cove by far has the highest fire flow demand at about 200 liters per second. And fire underwriter survey would require that flow for 2.5 hours, which, and then looking at the Cove Bay Zone 3 area only, which is residential, the Scarborough area and Eagle Cliff are all similar, requiring 76 liters per second for 1.6 hours. So the existing reservoir sizes are noted there. Cove Bay has a series of different reservoirs scattered throughout for a total of 3,242 cubic meters, which includes the new storage tank at the treatment plant. Cove Bay Zone 3 is 160 cubic meters. The Scarborough area would, that shouldn't have a number, my apologies, shouldn't have an existing storage number. And Eagle Cliff, I put non-applicable only, but I guess in essence, it's the 10,000 cubic meters of the open reservoir. And then, so the final two columns represent the amount of storage that is required based on current fire underwriter survey requirements. And there's two columns there. The first one is the basic minimum requirement, which is fire storage plus 25% of the maximum day demand. And then the final column is that same amount, fire underwriters, the fire volume plus 25% of max day, plus an additional 25% of the previous column. And that's more discretionary. It's recommended and common practice to add that additional 25%, but it's not mandatory. So we've got those two values, and you can see that I think at this point, we can kind of put the Cove Bay proper to the side and really focus our attention on the Zone 3 component. And you can see that Cove Bay, the Scarborough area, and Eagle Cliff all kind of require the same amount of volume. But what is common between all of them is the fire storage. The population is small enough that you would only need to account for one fire going on at any time. You definitely need to account for the cumulative max day demand, but you wouldn't have to account for multiple fires at any given time.
Glenn, if I can just ask a quick question, because I might have just zoned out when you were talking about Zone 3. Can you just tell me again what's Zone 3 of Cove Bay?
I will have a figure
Okay.
on that, so I will present that here shortly. One of the things when we start looking at water supply,
Glenn, sorry, I was on mute. Can you go back one slide again? And I just want to make sure I understand what you were saying about the lower three columns or lines rather. Are you saying that only one reservoir would be required to service all three of those zones? Or you're saying that we'd need three small reservoirs to meet one each for those zones?
Yeah, I'll clarify that in the options, but to answer your question, what this is presenting what is required to adequately service each of those communities. But as my later slides will present, there is the opportunity to service all three with a single reservoir.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Yep. So water supply and treatment, water quality is a big topic. So I'll come back and talk about the supply volume and rate issue. But in terms of treatment, Cove Bay, as you're all well aware, and Patrick already indicated, is about to commission a brand new ceramic ultrafiltration plant, or CUF for short. Its current phase is going to have a capacity of 2,400 cubic meters per day, expandable to 4,800 cubic meters per day. The current demand with near-term development is 1,726 cubic meters, so it's less than the commissioned capacity of the plant. And future long-term with all the growth is projected to be about 3,286 cubic meters a day, still again being below the expanded capacity of the plant. The next item for us to consider is, and I will present it on the next slide, in terms of making sure that Grafton Lake as a supply can sustainably service an expanded area. So to do that, we can't just look at a max day or an average day. We actually need to look at an annual cycle. So we needed to transpose some of the earlier information to clearly understand how much water is being consumed over an annual basis. And to do that, we looked at historic data to look at how the consumption was distributed month to month over the year. So that first column, or I guess it's the second column, represents the distribution by month. So in January, February, December, it's 6-7%, continuing into March, April, and then you can see it rising 10 and 11% through the spring and summer, and then tailing back off. Using the existing consumption, we get a total of 200,000 cubic meters of water being withdrawn for consumption. Again, this is just Cove Bay itself, not including Eagle Cliff. And then when the next column is getting into factoring in connection by both Eagle Cliff and the Scarborough area, and looking at future rates of consumption. So you can see that the water withdrawal can jump dramatically from a current 200 cubic meters per year to 453,000 cubic meters per year. And then other scenarios we looked at is the next one is assuming that Scarborough didn't connect, but Eagle Cliff did, drops to 419,000 cubic meters a year. And then just Cove Bay alone is 386 in the future. The other unique thing we did, and this actually has been, we did this study late last year, but I've repurposed the information for this study, is we monitored Grafton Lake. There's water level monitoring that takes place. And we, over several months, we monitored how the lake level changed with precipitation, and a mass balance, water mass balance was created to understand water inputs and outputs and how that influenced lake levels. And we calibrated that model to observe data. And then we did climate change projections. We calibrated it to year 2020, which is, just get my cursor here. 2020 is kind of in the middle here. And then under various scenarios, I know there's lots of lines. If you look at just the solid lines, you can sort of ignore the dash lines for now, but the solid lines here, green is an existing line. There's water level in the lake is on the vertical axes, and this is geodetic elevation. Across the top of the graph is a brown horizontal line that represents the spill crest elevation. So the level of the lake is controlled by a weir or stop logs, and the top elevation of the stop logs is approximately 106.35 meters in elevation. And then at the very bottom of the graph is a dark blue line, and that's essentially the bottom of the lake. Actually goes a lot deeper than that, but how the lake level is also controlled by the lowest spill point at the dam as it spills into Terminal Creek. And so this is essentially the operating range. The brown line to the blue line is essentially the operating range of the lake. The green line then, the solid green line, which is up here, is the projected, it does two things. What we do is there's an organization out of University of Victoria that does all the climate science. And they've advanced their work to the point where they've made global model projections to the year 2100, and they're able to provide that data in fairly discrete form. So we download that information and then put it into our calibrated mass balance that we did, and we generate a projected continuous simulation of what we anticipate lake levels being. And this graph, there's all kinds of parameters we could report out on. This particular set of data in this graph represents the projected lowest water elevation in the lake in any given year. So this is essentially the summer low. And our model then also backtracks, so it goes back to 1950. I could have ignored and just not demonstrated the historic, but I thought there was value in that anecdotally, we understand that the supply of Grafton Lake has been quite stable and consistent. And, you know, the first half of the graph starts at 1950, and in the middle goes to 2020. And when you look at the existing condition, the green line, you can see the increments. Maybe I should point out that the increments here on the vertical axis on the left, each gray line is only 0.2 meters, which for those of you who prefer imperial measure, that's only 8 inches. So the summer lows, according to this data, indicates that from 1950 to year 2020, the summer lows are very stable and generally operating within 8 inches of each other. As we move forward into the future, you can see that from 2020 to year 2090, there's anticipated to be about a 0.2 meter drop. If we just look at, and again, this is average or mean, I should say, mean, because there's lots of number crunching in the background and lots of data, but essentially there's a whole suite of different global climate change models that we use. I think there's 13 or 12 or 13 that we've actually applied. There isn't a right or a wrong. They're just different models that you apply different factors and different assumptions. So at this point in time, because none of them are right or none of them are wrong, we usually do what's referred to as an ensemble, where we take the results of all of these climate models and merge them together and create means or statistical percentiles. So what we've done is created an ensemble and first applied the mean. So the mean represents the solid line, and then the dash line, the upper dash line, is a 10th percentile, which means that only 10% of the time, statistically, only 10% of the time would the value be above that line. And then a 90th percentile, which conversely is 90% of the time it's projected that the minimum water level will be above these lines. So you can see that the operating range of the means and the 10th percentiles and the 90th percentiles still are within this operating range of the lake. But you can also see the effects of different decisions and different factors. So when we look at this green line, what it's showing is that without changing the number of users or habits or anything, just due to climate change alone, it's anticipated that the summer lows will gradually over time drop by about 0.2 meters or 8 inches. We then, still using the salted lines, we then drop, so from an existing condition to starting to look at future conditions, which the vertical drop in any given year is the result of development growth and new users. So Cove Bay alone, with increased development and water use, would cause it to drop about an additional 0.2, 0.3 meters, 8 to 12 inches, just because of growth in Cove Bay alone. The addition of Scarborough users and the addition of Eagle Cliff users would cause that to drop approximately 0.05 meters. So you can just see the gradual impact. And again, climate change, the slope of the line is caused by climate change. The vertical drop is caused by users. There's a lot to process there, I know. I'm gonna pause on that. Is there any questions that people have to make sure they kind of understand this graph?
You're gonna have to speak up because I can't see anybody.
I think the fundamental message is that we wanted to get through here is that there's adequate water to have increase. Yes, there is a change, but looking decades out, there seems to be a very good sustainable water supply there to accommodate new users, is the fundamental message coming out of this.
Hey, Glenn, it's
Yeah.
Liam here. I really like this graph. It's great to see, and thank you for the deep dive into that. I appreciate it. I'm curious, what's happening in the models in 20 years from now? Why are things, we're going to have like some mass floods, like some serious rain events?
That's a good question. I don't have an immediate answer for that. These are global models, and they just, there's all kinds of cyclical things that happen, and I can definitely research that for you and get back. But
it's okay. You don't need to do that. I was just curious because I generally understand that BC is going to see increased frequency and magnitude of rain events. But it does make sense that there's a steady sort of declining rate as we get more population and increased effects of climate change. So I was just curious about that.
Maybe Glen down between 2020 and 2040, you could put a little star that says apocalypse here or something.
Yeah, we could. Yeah. Well, there's two things that are going on with climate change. One is the annual volume, which this represents an annual cycle, and again, low lake levels are drying. So we're going to have more drought periods in general and hotter temperatures, but the window and the intensity of our precipitation is getting worse as well. So in terms of flood flow, then we are expected to get increased flooding, but that's an acute point in time. It's going to affect us through the winter and spring period. So getting to the question about the zone 3. So there's at the intersection of, on Miller Road, near Scarborough Road, there's a pump station at this location, which represents the boundary of the zone 3 area of Cove Bay. And following the water main up Scarborough Road to the end of Eagle's Nest Road, up to the left on this figure is the water main that goes up to the zone 3 reservoir. within Cove Bay. And this is a photo of that reservoir. It's approximately 35 years old. It's a welded steel tank, epoxy coated, which is essentially just paint. And it's currently 160 cubic meters in storage. It's got a top water elevation of 154 meters elevation. Using fire flow values to current standards, just to service Cove Bay High Zone 3 or Zone 3 itself, that tank should be about 498 to 623 cubic meters, depending on whether we use current or future population. And when we look at trying to service Eagle Cliff and the Scarborough area, that reservoir should be or would need to be about 600 to 750. So you can see that the incremental difference between servicing just Cove Bay or multiple communities isn't that dramatically different. And that's because, again, as I indicated earlier, that you only have to account for one fire flow, which represents the majority of that storage. So we think that, and I'll explain why, but servicing all three communities from a new reservoir within that Zone 3 is a strong possibility. We also,
Glenn, just
yeah.
again, going through the range, I interpreted that when I read it initially, that the high end of the two ranges, the 623 and the 750, that was taking into account that additional 25% cushion.
Right, sorry, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We considered perhaps developing a new site. The one thing that I'll communicate in subsequent slides, but the one very advantageous aspect about the High Zone 3 reservoir site is the infrastructure is already in place. A site's been established, water mains are established. Any new site, you're starting from scratch. And so there's going to be a huge premium associated with developing a new site. There are certainly possibilities on Crown land, but to put it on Crown land, in addition to the infrastructure and its costs, is requiring a disposition by the provincial government, which right now is generally a 1 to 2 year process. And then we also did consider perhaps putting a new reservoir within the Eagle Cliff community itself. But we didn't see any. The most likely that we saw was trying to situate something up in the vicinity of the existing open reservoir, some of the infrastructure, but as we know, there's deficiencies within the piping delivery system. So there's a lot more piping, whereas we're fortunate in the Zone 3 reservoir that it's already got an adequate water main, 200 millimeter water main coming down from that reservoir. So we looked at
just to clarify. So what you're saying is this proposal is taking into account the replacement of that tank and upgrading that tank. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. In essence, yes. That's the recommendation. Is that the Zone 3 reservoir is a great candidate site. The Cove Bay or the existing tank is already 35 years old. You can see in the photos that there's already signs of rusting around some of the seams. It's nearing its probably the end of its life. It's not expected necessarily that it's going to fail tomorrow, but these reservoirs like this, and I'll present it later, a lifespan of an epoxy coated steel tank is about 30 years, and it's already reached that. And it's also highly deficient, to meet fire flow requirements of today, never mind the connection to Scarborough or Eagle Cliff. It's grossly undersized, even to service the current Zone 3. So it's essentially due for renewal, and there's a great opportunity for cost sharing amongst three communities, which not only are cost effective for capital costs, but long-term operating and renewal costs as well. The less infrastructure shared amongst a higher number of users makes it more affordable for everybody.
Glenn, it's
Yeah.
Allison. With the epoxy coating, there's no option to recoat.
Yeah, there is, but yes, that could be explored. But you'd first have to do a condition assessment to know that the rust hasn't gone beyond beyond a point of no return, and it's something that could be looked at, but it's grossly undersized. So you'd have to do an evaluation of, does it make sense to try to refurbish it and hold on to that 160 and only supplement, or whether you just make the decision to replace it altogether.
Can I jump in for a minute? It's Marie. So we've been getting along with 160 cubic meters all this time. Have we had any problem servicing Cove Bay with that?
Well, you won't have a problem meeting domestic demand.
Okay, so this is,
The issue is what happens during a fire.
okay, and so that's all fuse requirements, right?
Yes.
Bus.
So there's no real requirement for us except for the insurance underwriters and the amount that they charge people for insurance based on the amount of fire protection that they have, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to meet the municipality's own standards.
Right.
Municipality's own standards dictate that fire protection should meet FUS requirements.
Right. No, I'm just thinking about whether we have allowed for this in our budgeting for our capital renewal stuff over the years, whether we have money set aside to replace the tank, and also if assessments have been done on the tank to see what the actual anticipated life is. Because have we set money aside for this, or how long down the road do we actually really have to do it if this whole proposal doesn't go ahead?
I know that condition assessments had been done in the past. I think it's been a while. To answer that question specifically, we would have to have a diver go in and inspect the interior of the tank, as well as have it assessed from the outside and talk to the suppliers about refurbishing capability.
We do send a diver in once a year to do the cleaning anyway, don't we?
Patrick would probably be the better person to answer that. I don't know of the frequency.
Okay.
I'd have to check on the frequency. I don't believe it's once per year. But.
Okay, but it isn't something totally out of the way to have a diver do that as part of other work that we're doing anyway.
It's not a huge task.
No. We contemplated doing it as part of, but we agreed to defer that at this stage of the study.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks.
So in terms of tank types, again, putting location aside, there's really three types of tanks we look at. One is an epoxy coated steel, which is the existing one, which is just paint on steel with about a 30-year lifespan. It's the cheapest option. The second is a steel tank, but is referred to as a glass fused, which is a porcelain enamel coating. And it increases the lifespan significantly to about 50 years, but only represents about a 10% premium on cost. And this is becoming a more commonly applied version of steel tanks, and will be the one that we would recommend. And then you get into concrete, which there's only one concrete tank on island. Conceptual Bay has a concrete tank.
There's three.
Oh, is there three? Okay, my apologies. Where are the other two now?
Hood Point and Fairweather.
Oh, okay. Their lifespan is in the order of 75 to 100 years, provided they're built right, but substantial cost increase. They're 2 times plus, and the table at the bottom reflects the cost variation there, depending on the size. 600 to 750 cubic meters would be in the 1.5 to 1.8 million dollar range for concrete, versus 410 to 425 for epoxy coated steel, and then a modest increase to 445 to 475 for the glass fused. Any questions on reservoir storage? Because now I'm going to start talking about water mains and water main options in terms of connection.
So Glenn, just a clarification on the reservoir. You're recommending the glass fused at a size that would ultimately replace the one that's there.
Correct.
As well as add the new storage, but you wouldn't remove the one that's there until it falls apart?
No, it's possible that we may remove this one, only because there's a defined right-of-way that is available for the reservoir. And so we'd have to look at siting capability, whether there's adequate room or whether it makes cost-effective sense to build the new one in a completely new footprint. There's certainly some logistics, but fortunately, unlike other systems which are fully dependent on a single reservoir to get through construction period, if we were to dismantle this one, at least there is other reservoirs that this zone could draw on during the construction period. So I would anticipate, Allison, to answer your question, that we would probably dismantle it.
Okay. You sort of had 2 options in your report, so.
Yep.
And sorry, Glenn, is there not additional storage now in place in Eagle Cliff as well?
There's no tank other than the open reservoir.
What about by the wells? Or
I
that
thought that something went in up Highland or Upland Trail or something like that.
Yeah, there is, but that's just a minor size tank sufficient to meet short-term demand as a pressure booster for higher properties in a summer low water event. It's not sufficient to meet overall requirements.
Those were two 5,000 gallon tanks, and as part of the emergency measures that were put in place.
So when we start looking at water main connections, so the gray-blue lines represent the existing water mains. And this is essentially the Scarborough area that I was showing earlier. There's 2 water main alignments that we've been looking at. One is coming off Scarborough Road and linking to Eagle Cliff Road, represented by the blue line. And another one is looping it in as an extension off of Ocean View Drive, and then again hooking up with Eagle Cliff Road. The pressures actually indicate that the blue line is better from a pressure perspective. So to make the blue line work, we need about 1.3 kilometers of 250 millimeter diameter water main, and would need to upgrade 600 meters of water main within Eagle Cliff to 200 millimeters. And this is simply to reduce head loss so that it's capable of pushing the fire flow to the most northern limit of Eagle Cliff.
And just so I understand, having gone through this, you mentioned as part of the background which side of the unserviced lots expressed potentially more interest in joining the project.
Right.
Do either of the options preclude anybody, or with either option, we still have the ability to connect anybody within the unserviced area that needs service?
Correct. All the analysis, all the supply and fire suppression and delivery calculations that we've done would be able to accommodate all those users. The question becomes the most cost-effective route, and the municipality sent out questionnaires to the 115 lots within the Scarborough area to seek interest to connect. But it was surprisingly a relatively poor response rate, which suggests that there's not a burning demand. But I was going to elaborate that in a few moments, but the orange line, the orange route goes up Ocean View, and some residents along Ocean View have been approaching the municipality for a few years, desperately wanting to connect. Some of them, in fact, have made ad hoc connections. But wells, private wells are failing along Ocean View, and there's a number of users that are quite desperate to connect. So the only disadvantage of the blue line is it's not going right in front of those properties, and that to accommodate a connection for them, there would be still additional water mains that would have to take place. We essentially, the blue lines and the orange line, and the limit of our study is looking at a trunk line connection. But to properly and fully service the Scarborough area, there would have to be other local means that are created. The advantage of the orange line is that it literally goes along the frontage of those homeowners who do want to connect. But because it's a more circuitous route, the water actually has to flow down south and then loop back around to the north to actually get water to Eagle Cliff. There's greater losses, so we actually need to do more water main for the orange option than the blue option. So I'll summarize it here on the next slide. But with the blue option, we have to upgrade 600 meters of water main within Eagle Cliff. And in the orange option, we'd have to upgrade 800 meters, so an additional 200 meters of water main. So in summary, the Ocean View, or the orange line, is about 1,400 meters of 250 diameter, plus 800 meters of 200, which go largely through roadways, but there's a forest trail component for a total estimated cost of 2.1 million. And again, that's the option that has more owner preference because of the connections that are required. And then the Eagle Cliff, or the blue option, is 1,300 meters of 250, 600 meters of 200, all in roadways, and but less support within the Scarborough area, and about 1.8 million. So there's about a $300,000 difference there.
So again, Glenn, if say, for example, we went with the $1.8 million route, but the unserviced lots in the Scarborough area still wanted to be connected and therefore would require a separate loop, what would the cost of that loop be?
Yeah, we can look at that. Well, we know that I guess it was last year. No, 2 years ago, 2019. There was an estimate made to extend the water main up Ocean View to service these folks that are in demand for it, and it was over $300,000 to do that. So to fully service those, it would be probably at least that additional 300,000.
Yeah, and just some additional context around that. Last year, there were some residents on Ocean View that were organizing a petition to expand the local service area. And they had, we ran into some challenges. And one of the issues was that this process is going on, but they had support of, reportedly, they had support of the majority in that service area expansion for spending the money on the water main, which was something in the $400,000 range was the estimate. So that we do have demonstrated support for that area to spend that kind of money on.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out whether it was going to be less than $300,000 to add it as an addition, or whether we're dollars ahead to go the $2.1 million. You know, that's all I was trying to figure out. Thank you.
Yeah. So our recommendations are to pursue a new reservoir in Zone 3, size to also service the Scarborough area and Eagle Cliff. The one thing that we will be doing is during the design stage is the one refinement we'll need to look at carefully is the Zone 3 reservoir elevation is kind of right at the threshold of what we need it to be to have adequate pressure to fully service Eagle Cliff's higher. There's as you're all aware, the trunk line is at one elevation, but there's a number of properties that are built up slope. The reservoir elevation for Zone 3, based on our calculations, can service meet pressure requirements to any homes built up to elevation 125 meters. And when I look at the contours and the air photos, it would appear as though the highest two homes that or buildings that I can see are right at that 125 meter elevation. So the preliminary elevation information I have suggests that it'll work, but we'll need some more detailed information to validate some elevations. However, there's only 2 or 3 homes on that threshold, and it's a very simple solution is that we may have to add a little booster pump on those service lines. So it's not a game changer in whether or not the strategy should move forward. It's just we might need to deal with 2 or 3 homes to make sure that they have sufficient pressure. So our recommendation is to continue pursuing a new reservoir. I don't have a preference one way or the other or a firm recommendation in terms of which water main alignment is pursued. So that's discretionary decision between LACs and municipal staff.
Hey, Glen.
Yeah,
I would say that we do have a recommendation for the ocean view alignment in this case, given that we have been approached by residents who don't have basic water needs met by their private wells and have already expressed the desire to be a part of this plan. And also given that they've expressed the willingness to pay for essentially more than the gap between the 2 options.
Yep.
That would be another aspect of that is that in terms of the extra water main upgrades along Eagle Cliff Road within the Eagle Cliff system, that is work that has to be done at some point. And certainly when there was a leak fixed on that section of Maine near Highland Trail, it didn't inspire a lot of confidence in the existing. It was, you know, the cheapest PVC pipe bedded in large angular rock. It wasn't. So replacing more of that main is also a good thing.
okay.
No harm in that.
Good.
It's a bit more money now as opposed to in the future, but
Yeah.
so just to clarify, I think that would be our recommendation to the LAC.
Okay.
And the dam decommissioning?
Yeah, and the final one is the province is, ultimately, if it's no longer needed as a water supply source, and the province has identified it as being a liability that needs attention, I think there's got to be some efforts put towards decommissioning to make sure it isn't a liability for anybody. What that actually looks like is yet to be determined.
Yeah, I would assume that we just wait for the reservoir to drain down to its lowest point or near lowest point, and then cut a slot, an armored slot in the side, and then just as Carkner Creek flows, it just becomes part of the natural outflow of the new, much smaller puddle.
In essence, I fully agree with you, Tim. Yeah.
So there's probably provincial approvals required for the process, remembering what we had to do out here in Quarry Park.
Yeah, there's provincial process that would be associated with decommissioning, and just a little bit more context around that is when the dam safety officers came out here last year, last summer, indicated that this was a significant consequence dam pending further assessment. They sent a list of required information that we had to supply to them, which we don't, a lot of it we don't have, and it is quite a lot of work to actually obtain it, to get all of the dam safety assessments and delineate the zones of inundation. And so we've kind of been putting that off pending some clear direction and decisions about the fate of the reservoir itself.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, Patrick, and Glenn, you might have firsthand knowledge of this. As I recall, when Thurber was up on site, they had showed some aerial photos dating back to like the 20s, and the reservoir was there as a reservoir, as a natural reservoir at that point. The only thing that Eagle Cliff has done over the years is, increased its height and expanded it somewhat, but it's still a natural collection point for Carkner Creek before it would naturally outflow down its normal route. So I would suggest that our position for the province would be that we would be returning it to more its natural state and pick a date, back pre-records. Anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. How far we allow it to drain back is definitely a decision that will have to be made.
So, you carrying on?
Yeah, I just have one final, and that really comes down to just an introductory statement in terms of governance and finance, and it goes back to kind of my earlier statement about fundamentally what we're talking about creates a merged system from a supply, treatment, and distribution perspective. So some decisions will need to be made around just what kind of governance should fall out of this. There was a grant application. Finance will be a big one. We are talking millions of dollars, but the municipality did make a grant application a number of months ago. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be October or something before the results are actually known. So that's going to be highly influential on the financial arrangements. So depending on what happens with that, then Raj will have to sort out with you folks a debt financing arrangement. And recognizing that there'll be a number of properties that connect over time, is to look at some latecomer agreements as well. One of the things that I guess will be important is just, if there is a formal merger, is how do you distribute costs, and the fairness will certainly have to be one of the governing or guiding principles of that. And not only in terms of new works, but around long-term reduction or debt financing and debt servicing of the new water treatment plant, which is already in progress. So next steps, I think now this is my last one, Allison. is to go through questions and comments with the LECs, seeking support for merging those systems as discussed, reporting out to council and seeking their desires, moving forward immediately with cost distribution and finance strategy for a merged system. Although I guess that will have to potentially, I guess that's an important decision point that folks need to make is, do you wait for the results of the grant or do you forge ahead regardless? Moving forward immediately with water main and reservoirs design to make sure that those are shelf ready when the finance aspect is resolved. One of the little things we need to do too is right now we haven't assessed the booster pump that feeds the zone 3 reservoir. There was inadequate information available for us to do that. So we're gonna have to do a little bit more research. Again, it's
Glenn, is that something that needs to be done regardless?
well, no, probably not. I mean, if nothing happened, then it's not an urgency. We just want to make sure that with increased demand, I mean, the reservoir is what, you know, largely handles the change in flow and volumes, but the booster pump does have to keep up with that demand. And so we just didn't have adequate information to fully assess it. So we just need to do a little bit more homework and determine whether or not any improvements to that pump station are required. But like I said, it wouldn't be a game changer. And then thirdly, we've already had preliminary conversation with Vancouver Coastal Health, but certainly any of the changes that we're talking about is substantial. We're fortunate that we don't have to go through a process of verifying water treatment requirements with the new water treatment plant going in place. The only thing we may need to look at is whether or not any supplemental chlorination is required because of residency time. There's quite a distance for water to come from the new water treatment plant to the farthest extremities in the reservoir. So we'll just have to work with Vancouver Coastal to determine whether or not any supplemental treatment may be required. And that concludes the presentation.
Okay, Patrick,
Yeah.
you had a timeline. Do you want to put that up or is that?
Yeah, I was going to elaborate a little bit on one of the recommendations that Glen had up there, which was to proceed immediately with the additional design work. So,
Patrick, I'm sorry to interrupt, but before we leave Glen, I had a question about the report. It's not part of the presentation today, but you had gone through the estimated costs of both the 200 millimeter and the 250 millimeter line on a cost per meter basis. Yeah. And you've been using the 864 and 963 for the 200, 250 respectively.
Yeah.
But on page 113 of the report, the numbers you have on a cost per meter basis are 650 and 700 respectively. And on that page, it still suggests that that does include all the contingency. So I was just wondering if you could explain the difference, or is that just an oversight, or what the...
To be honest, I would have to review that and make sure there wasn't an error or no oversight of any kind.
I thought that was just a test you were putting us through to see if we're really reading the report.
Well, you passed it in flying colors.
Anyway, perhaps you could look into that and just provide clarification. That does represent a significant difference, and I'm sure it's explainable, but yeah, the report does give two different figures there, and just wanted to see if we could get that sorted out.
I absolutely will get that as soon as this meeting's over.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, Patrick, carry on.
okay, so in terms of the the question around timeline for moving forward with the next phase of design. I'm just gonna share my screen, which will kick.
You want to stop sharing, Glenn?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Oh,
Stop sharing.
I can't find my button. Was I already? Oh,
All right, if you're on a laptop, it's up. You find it?
Yeah, that's Patrick now.
Patrick stopped now. Yeah, he booted
Thank
me
you.
in. Yep.
So can people see my screen?
Yes.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Bigger, Patrick?
Well, it's small.
Yeah,
You can't make it any bigger. It's an I'm on my iPad. That's why it's small.
all right. So generally, ideally, if we were able to move forward right away, there is a possibility of having solution in place before the dry period next summer. A number of things have to go right, but it's technically feasible. The downside is that we wouldn't, any expenses incurred before a grant is approved. This is the scenario where we find out the grant is successful in October 2021. If we've spent money on design, that's not eligible. And that's probably in the order of $75,000 or $80,000. A lion's share of that would be borne by the Eagle Cliff system. There could be latecomer arrangements to recover some of that from other properties joining the system. There would be some contribution from Cove Bay relating to the reservoir portion as well. If we were to put things on hold, we'd like to get some endorsement about the approach from the LACs. Another option is to put the design process on hold until we find out about the grant application. The downside there is we lose several months waiting for that. And we're essentially guaranteeing that we'll have another summer of being at risk of running out of water, running low on water in the Eagle Cliff system. And we'd be looking at, so the timeline I have up here shows that assumption. Essentially, we find out about the grant. Hopefully it's good news, and that really drives our financing arrangements. And then we move forward with the design process from there. We may be able to have construction completed by the end of 2022. So we would have the solution in place for summer of 2023, but not 2022. This is an optimistic timeline, assuming that we don't hit any unexpected snags, which could occur. So something we'll be looking for is a recommendation from the LAC about which path to take. Proceed with design now, wait until the fall.
So Patrick, I'm getting some feedback somehow, so sorry. Anyway, looking at your option 2 timeline with completion, by December, I think, and even assuming that's an optimistic assumption, that's still, if we get some delays, it's through that winter. And I don't think that's going to be an issue. And we know that for summer of 2023, the solution's in place. I don't think that we're in a position to be able to say, yeah, go ahead, spend money like it's an absolute go ahead, because anybody that I've spoken to in the community about this has all come back to the same question. Well, what's the story in the grant? How can we make a decision without knowing whether we've got grant money or not? And if we do, how much? So I really think that we need to, unfortunately, put a delay on until a grant decision is made, and then look at our timeframes from that. That's what I'm hearing. Glenn, Carla, Ian, if you guys want to chime in, if you got any thoughts on it, feel free.
I did want to ask what's the confidence in the grant being approved, first off, and secondly, what's the course of action if it's not? I mean, do we have a plan B, as it were? Like, what happens if they come back and say no, the grant's not approved? Are we still moving forward with this plan? Is there a different plan?
Can I just pipe in here for a sec? Maybe we should go back and agree on the alignment, and that way then the Cove Bay people don't have to listen to the discussion about how Eagle Cliff's going to finance it.
All right, so you're talking the alignment of going down the either down Eagle Cliff or through Ocean View. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so
the 1.8 versus 2.1.
Yeah, if we got that one out of the way.
Or
sorry, Patrick.
Marie?
the recommendation, if we're going to deal with recommendations, then, the general recommendations was to pursue a merged system. Then the particular details around that would be looking at replacing the reservoir at the zone 3 at the high zone 3 site, and generally looking at a water main alignment along Ocean View, and or we could refer to the as laid out in the urban systems report of February 12th, something like that.
Yeah.
Murray, I think you wanted to I just wanted to sort out the process, I guess. It's what needs to be decided.
Yeah, the first thing I think that what Cove Bay wants to do is to find out how serious the Ocean View residents really are. So they're talking about making a petition, I assume, to become a, what do you call it, an improvement area, local improvement area? I guess it's something like that, something like that. So they have to apply to us. We probably have to give them a budget up front about the sort of order of magnitude money they're talking about. So let's say it's $400,000, and then find out how many people really want to get on board. Because if we're talking about our share of upgrading a tank that is currently serving us well, and which we had no plans 15 minutes ago of replacing in the foreseeable future, that's a huge cost implication for Cove Bay. So if there's 110 properties in Scarborough, which I certainly didn't realize that we were looking at anything like that as a potential number of additional users, it's a significant amount of money that we add to our annual dues for fees from everybody. So it changes the finances completely. So that's, for us, I think number one is get back to them and say, go for it, guys. If you want to make application to join Cove Bay, there's no time like the present. And that'll give us a lot of detail on what the financial implications are going forward.
Just to follow up on that, Murray, we did get to the point of producing a design and cost estimate for an extension of the water main up Ocean View, the southern portion of Ocean View, upper Ocean View, I guess you call it. And that was in the order of 400,000. There were, I believe there was 18 residents in the area that was proposed for expansion. The issue we ran into, and this is something that's going to have, under any of these scenarios, is going to have to be cleaned up, is that there was, I believe, 5 of those residents were not officially included in the boundary, but are connected to the system. And it's unclear the history of how that happened, whether contributions were made. And we've got actually about 24 properties in that situation. that we haven't figured out how to address that yet. So, but the people leading that petition had, I don't have any documentation on this. They informally indicated to me that in canvassing the people within the area, they had enough support to clear the thresholds under the Local Government Act to trigger the local service area expansion at the cost estimates provided. But that's something that we will be following up on.
Yeah, if I could just elaborate on that for a minute. We've been playing with this area since 1992. We went through a fairly long process in about 2003. And the bottom line was anybody whose well was currently doing well for them wasn't interested. Anybody who had problems with their well was extremely interested, right? People who had already been hooked up informally, who were paying us money every year to be on the system and have been since 1992, did not consider themselves newcomers that wanted to pay for an 8-inch line when the 2-inch line was serving them just fine. So it's a real complex issue trying to figure out what is a fair approach to that. But I have a sense that at the end of the day, we're going to be back to where we ended up in 2003 when we went through this process, where you just couldn't get a critical mass of them interested in the kind of money that we had to talk about. So, and if we don't have them, we've got a real problem trying to convince the rest of the Cove Bay people to start paying for upgrading that tank and upgrading the water line and so on. So anyway, those are my concerns on this.
So just thinking about process and timing, can we get back to gallery view?
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, there we go. How crucial is it, Glen and Patrick, to make the decision now as to which line route? I mean, I'm getting the feel from what Eagle Cliff is saying that they're wanting to wait to see whether they get the grant or not. Murray's raising a bunch of questions, and that may need to be answered in the period while we're waiting to get the grant. And if we get the grant, will the grant pay for the line in either way?
Yeah,
I mean,
there is some flexibility in terms of the grant to, I mean, what we put forward for the grant application was based on the council report from last summer, where costs were laid out at a high level, looking at, well, we're allowing this much for water mains connection, this much for a new treated water reservoir, and this much for water main upgrades. We're able to, the cost estimates that Glen presented are somewhat lower than that. And you are able to apply to change the scope of the project to vary from what you initially applied for, what we initially applied for in October 2020. But it does have to be a specific application to change the scope. So we may be able to, if we're successful in getting all the money we applied for, you know, we may be able to also to fund the reservoir, water main, new water main connection, and at least a portion of the upgraded main within Eagle Cliff. So that's a possibility.
Grant doesn't specifically cover the new water zone 3 reservoir.
We did include a reservoir. We didn't say specifically exactly where it was going to be.
Okay, but so there is a new
include
reservoir in the grant application. So that might relieve Murray of some of his concerns then.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the bottom line, what I see, Allison and Patrick and Murray, is we've got an 8-month basically hiatus before we can jump in feet first and need to really come up with some answers, community commitment, you know, actual cash, etc. I mean, that's, you know, unfortunately, that's what I see. And that 8 months delay does not necessarily put summer of 2023 in jeopardy. And so, yes, we're going to have, a potential water issue in 2021. We're going to have that either way. In a perfect world where we were, gung-ho and ready to go now, we might have a solution by 2022, but very likely by the end of summer 2022, which still means we've got the summer of 2022 at issue. And really the solution is for 2023. And to me, whether we make that decision today or in 8 months, summer 2023 is still the target by which we have our water solution in place.
Yeah, I just like to say is that the money, if we knew we had a grant, then I think at what Murray and the people in Ocean View might be swayed much more to come online, because everyone right now is just can't believe how much money is involved. And therefore, if we're not going together as a group, we're really not taking advantage of that grant. But we have to know what the grant is to then go back to the group and say, this much money we've raised or that's been offered. And that might just bring everybody together and get on with it. And also the comment that having that small reservoir, if there's a serious fire, that reservoir could ultimately let down. So the water amount is critical. We have to do it properly or not at all. And so anyway, I think we should wait for the grant.
Wait for the grant and do some of this other research and question answering in the next few months. Is that generally what I'm hearing? Glen? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Glen?
there's small cost background information that needs to be confirmed. As Glen said, the potential need to house a chlorine booster pump as part of the reservoir, the need to confirm whether there's a need for individual booster pumps to meet the high property requirements. Those are small fine-tuning background information to be gathered and have at the ready. In terms of the two routes, in my opinion, I think going the ocean route makes sense. Yes, there's some additional costs, but if Glen's estimates are within a plus minus, they're still less than the previous estimates that were put out. So that comes into play, and that brings additional players to the table for additional share if there's need to do top-up dollars. It meets multiple demands. It also sweetens the pot as far as the grant goes, because if you're bringing more properties into this system, that too is going to be a feather in the cap, a plus. So that's what I think. I mean, I don't know that we need a decision that says it's got to be one way or the other at this point, but it makes sense to do that one route, the Ocean View route. And I think we're unfortunately crossing our fingers and hoping the sooner we hear grant availability, the sooner we can, start to get a little bit more serious about getting community commitment and approvals.
Ian and Carla, do you want to add anything? Okay, thanks,
Nothing
Ian.
to add.
Okay. Carla?
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to.
And Ron, you've been very quiet.
No, I have nothing further to add. I think, I mean, it would sure be nice to move this forward quickly, because I see, it's always a waste of funds and time and effort if things get delayed. But I also understand why the Eagle Cliff members want to wait for the answer. The only question and it's a rhetorical question, I don't want to answer, but is if the grant doesn't come, I'm getting the strong sense that doing nothing is an option, and I just put the rhetorical out that I really, none of my business, but as long as everyone's happy with doing nothing in the Eagle Cliff world, then I guess I guess that's what happens. But it does seem to me that moving forward has some advantages, but I also understand the pressure coming back from the public.
Yeah, you're right, Ron, and Glenn kind of alluded to that. What is Plan B? And to be honest, we really don't have a Plan B, but it's going to be a lot easier to sell the community on only option Plan A with money to back it, as opposed to trying to sell the community on our only Plan A without money to back it.
Yeah, no, I understand, but Plan B will probably look a lot like Plan A without the grant.
It will. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so I
over.
just kind of get, I'm not in your shoes, so that's not fair to me, but it just seems that you should probably think of it as that. but I'm going to cut out because I don't, it's not fair for me to comment beyond.
Patrick, I have a question for you. Is there, you were talking about all the costs about setting it up. In your opinion, is there some things that we could spend part of that, what you said, roughly $80,000 or $50,000 to get something started? Are there some things that if we didn't spend all of that money that in the startup, but there's things that from an engineering point of view, they should get started on? Like, so we actually can spend, because we do have some capital funds, right? And there are some things that just, if the grant comes through and it's there, and because we did this, we're that much better to get going. I don't know.
Well, one thing that may be very useful to do in the interim here is to clean up the situation of what is the Cove Bay water system boundary, and who's part of the system and who's not. The other, the last correspondence I had with the residents from Upper Ocean View who were leading that petition was that this process is going on, and it may make more sense for you guys to be part of a larger group. Following up on this, I'm going to go back to them and just indicate what's been decided in terms of holding off until we have some certainty around grant funding. They may want to move their own process forward and construct that 300 or 350 meter section of water main to get water service sooner. And
Patrick, maybe I'm wrong here, but if they decide to do that and go that on their own, I don't think that has any negative impact on the project that we're putting forward. That if they've got the support, the cash, the money, the everything required, all the T's crossed and I's dotted, I don't see how that hurts us. But on the flip side, if they were aware that there is a grant 8 months down the road, we're going to know the outcome, and it might end up saving them some money as a package. Maybe they got thicker wallets than I do, but I can't see them saying, yeah, go ahead, spend the money anyway.
Oh, that's a good point.
Going back to Len's question, that was on my mind as well. Like, I mean, what stood out to me was I think it was $75,000 for the design process to get started right away. Is there something, Patrick, that I guess that Len was asking? Could the Eagle Cliff LEC say, well, what if we approved a $20,000 budget? Would that be enough to move things forward in the interim while we're waiting on the response? I mean, this looming question of what if we don't get the approval? What is the next step? I mean, inevitably we have to have the conversation. Is this the option for us? No matter what, we have to move forward. So I'm of the opinion that it's not necessarily bad money spent, but I do know the tone of the community is not really, they want to know about the grant first. But maybe if there's something we can go back and say, maybe if we get started with X amount of dollars, will it actually advance us, or are we just, might as well just wait.
Right. That's something I would want to talk to Glen about in terms of the timeline for the design process. Is there something in terms of advancing the preliminary design that makes sense for a lower amount? And you mentioned $20,000, but something. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we're. I would have to get back to you on that.
Well, I can interject a little bit. I mean, there's the bulk of the effort is actually preparing the full-blown design, but there's a few little things. One is to work with Vancouver Coastal, assess the water quality issue and determine is any supplemental treatment required. That's one early decision that could be figured out. The second is we could do some field work and verify some elevations to determine whether there could be some pressure issues within some individual homes. We could explore and determine whether or not any changes to the booster pump station are required. Those are three activities that I could see advancing, but nothing really beyond that. Just to reiterate, I mean, advancing design, like Ron was indicating that, you know, it's the same, it's still plan A, just depending on, and that's the only disadvantage of moving forward in any substantial way is it's money spent that you can't recover from the grant, that's all. But it'll probably result in the same outcome as just money that can't be recouped.
Yeah, understood. But I mean, the bottom line is we're but for representing 110.
Yeah.
And of the 110, if I had a casual conversation with any of the other 106 that are not on this call, the immediate answer is we're not ready to move forward because we don't know what the money situation is.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. And
So is there work that needs to be done over the summer or over the next few months on what plan B would be if we don't get the grant?
No, I think there's I think what Tim and Glenn were saying is there isn't really a plan B. It's just the financing picture changes substantially depending on the grant.
Well, that's what I
application.
meant, the financing plan
Yeah.
B. So we get those ducks ready to go. So if worst
Well,
case scenario, we don't get the grant, then we're ready to go.
Well, what that means is in October, we have to have an Eagle Cliff community meeting.
Yeah.
And we sit down and say, okay, bottom line is this looks like it's $30,000 out of everybody's pocket. You know, like it or leave it, lump it, whatever. And then as part of that, then we are going to be seeking muni inputs as to what options there are going to be to finance that $30,000 per household, you know, be it a 20-year tax plan or whatever that looks like. But at that point, we need to have that discussion with the community.
But I guess that's what I'm saying. We may have to give some thought to that, or Raj and Aoife may have to, before we get to October, so that we're ready to lay out those options. And I guess it's long-term borrowing is what is coming to my mind.
Yeah, agreed.
Isn't long-term borrowing on the agenda regardless of the grant or not? Like, because there'll be a portion, it's not 100% grant money. Like there'll be some.
It can be.
Well, there's always ineligible costs, right? So it's 100% of eligible costs.
I guess Patrick's going on the assumption that everything we're going to spend in the design and construction is going to be eligible. So
Right.
Maybe that's something we need to ask Key and Glen to look at closely.
Yeah,
There will always be some ineligible costs.
There's also some reserves that Eagle Cliff has in the
Right.
200 to 250,000 range. I'm not sure exactly what it is right now.
Right. Oh, okay, that might cover it because there'll be some legal fees and right-of-ways and things like that that won't be eligible.
And frankly, that's one of the reasons I'm reluctant to go ahead and spend that $200,000+ towards design at this point. because, you know, we would be potentially exhausting those reserves, which may be needed for the ineligible
Yeah.
costs.
But we can definitely do, not speaking on Raj or Aoife's behalf, but we can definitely do some, you know, long-term financial forecasting, and we can push it to a 30-year debenture as well to make it easier. If that assessment.
Yeah, I think that if like I said, however many months that's going to take to get it pretty clear, if we had that number in our head, so when we talk to our neighbors, we say, oh, and by the way, this is what the financing would look like if we don't get a grant. Like, work out that number. It's going to be, you know, but if we get the grant, that's going to change dramatically. But then, because that's what they want to hear. How much? But then we actually can say, but, well, if we extend it over 30 years, this is what it's going to be. I mean, it may not be what they want to see, but it's the cost of living on Bowen.
And as we say, there is no plan B. You know, we're hearing a lot, or I'm hearing a lot from neighbors saying, well, you know, what's wrong with our water today? Why can't we just continue on, et cetera? And we all know the arguments why that doesn't work, but it's still a fairly strong education process that we need to implement amongst everybody. And that becomes a far easier education when you can say, and we have $2.5 million in the bank that's being provided for us to move this forward. Or, you know, it just becomes a far easier conversation.
So it sounds like some of those conversations with Vancouver Coastal Health as to the reasons why this is needed, and maybe sharing of information as to why the Cartner Brook Dam and everything from the dam safety officer isn't really a viable option. And I
seem to recall that when we looked at that option, that was the more expensive option than this option.
I didn't.
Yes, it was slightly more in the way it was framed. We do have I think this is yet another discussion, probably for another meeting. There's still the connection fee discussion item that is still to be determined and closed out. That's another part of the discussion as well.
Right.
So that's going to be the contribution to join the Cove Bay water system will be there regardless.
Well, yes, and then it might be up for some discussion. I know that Allison sent out the policy basis by which that was determined, and my quick back of the envelope calculation suggests that Eagle Cliff actually might be bringing money to the table relative to a asset per household basis. One, and two. It's interesting because it says that policy applies when residents petition to connect. And frankly, what could be argued here is the residents are not petitioning to connect. The residents are being told by the municipality, here's your option.
Okay, so we have more things to sort out.
As I say, that's another discussion for another time, but just to put a pin on it and say it's done, I think that discussion's still to be had.
So on the basis of sort of wrapping this up and not leaving Glen and Patrick, at this point, I'm not hearing any objections with proceeding on the assumption that we will add Eagle Cliff and all the Ocean View properties to the Cove Bay system. You're not saying stop, no, we don't want to do this at this point.
Can I jump in for a sec on that one?
Yeah.
So, having Eagle Cliff and filling out Scarborough as part of Cove Bay is perfectly logical, good planning for the long term. But we do have the fact that the people of Cove Bay are going to have a huge increase in how much they're paying for water. And if we try to say to them, and by the way, we're going to have Eagle Cliff and Scarborough join up to use the water that we've just spent these millions of dollars on upgrading our plant, and there's nothing coming in for that. Figuring out the fairness of how this works financially is another huge piece of it for Cove Bay to eventually approve the thing. And a complicating factor in that is the whether or not we have to, in fact, replace the high zone reservoir. If it turns out that it's good policy for us to replace it and to have a new one, and that would cost this amount of money, and now that we're getting a part of the grant that's going to Eagle Cliff, blah, 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 makes it a far easier sell. But there shouldn't be the idea that Eagle Cliff is bringing more to the table than Cove Bay is so far from a non-starter. Sorry, Jim.
No, Murray, I didn't mean to imply that. What I'm looking at is if you look at the policy that Allison provided us vis-a-vis
Council adopted.
that council adopted, that is how you calculate what the, after the fact user connection fees are. If you do that, and my rough calculations without having the actual numbers, using Raj's old reports and whatnot, and reading between the lines as much as I could, the value per capita of the Eagle Cliff water system now versus the value of the Cove Bay water system per capita now, Eagle Cliff's value is, my calculations showed it to be slightly higher. Now, all that said, we're still potentially bringing the $3.1 million or 3 million dollars that we're talking about as all the connection fees, running all the lines, the potential upgrade of the reservoir, et cetera, to the table. So we're coming with, potential cash in hand, plus we're now sharing the future cost of your debt because we're now part of that system. We're too now paying your increased water rates, which are going to be increased water rates for us now, et cetera. So I'm not saying we have more than you, therefore we're not paying. It's just from a blanket statement that was made early on in our meeting said, oh, and if we're going to join Cove Bay, it's likely going to be this $30,000 per household, plus probably a $10,000 connection fee just to get you into Cove Bay. And what I'm arguing is that $10,000 plus is what needs to be discussed quite a bit in depth before we just accept that as a solid statement.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
Okay, so is the takeaway on the basis that some of us have another meeting to go to later on this afternoon. I think maybe Steph's been making notes. We can make a list of all the questions that have been raised and the list of things we think need to be solved in the next few months, on the hopes that maybe we might hear before October for the grant. So sometime once Raj gets the financial statements done, maybe there'll be a little time to work on some of the financial numbers. And is that fair?
Sure.
Going to do any,
Sorry, I just wanted to add a couple things. I wanted to commend Glen and Urban Systems. Your report was very good. I thought it was quite thorough, understandable, well-written, easy to go through. I appreciated that. Thank you. Good job. Liam, I wanted to ask you the question with your history on the grants from the provincial perspective, and we've been going by the October, we'll likely hear by. Is there, any connections that you have that show that yes, indeed, it could happen earlier?
Well, it doesn't hurt to always inquire, and we stay in touch with my old team quite frequently.
Perfect.
But yeah, we're not going to get any early advance warning, even with my connection. So
I was just kind of crossing my fingers that in a post-COVID or current COVID world, in the interest of infrastructure encouragement and all that kind of stuff, whether maybe October was the worst case scenario, there might be some push earlier.
I don't think so, because that program is a long-lived program.
Not a COVID program.
It's not a stimulus program. So they're operating numerous stimulus programs right now, which is a higher priority for them to get those out the door. So,
And just a silly question, is there any option of jumping on any of those?
no, we would basically have to withdraw this application.
Okay,
And there's no way we could build this project in the time frame that those stimulus programs are operating under.
Roger, fair enough, thanks. Okay, I'm out. Sorry,
Okay.
Allison, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say from a timeline perspective, we were over a year before we heard for the community center from when we applied. And it was a grant in a similar, another branch of the same program. So Glenn, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to answer Tim's earlier question. I looked at the report and everything was correct. It was just how it was presented. So in the main body of the report, the unit costs include the engineering and contingencies. In the appendix, we itemize the installation costs and then separately the engineering and contingencies. So the ones in the appendix, you just have to inflate it by the engineering contingency.
Okay, thanks. All right. Are we?
So do I get any recommendations or any consensus? No?
I think
No, I
that
think,
the second recommendation you put in the chat would be the only one, which is essentially that we're going to defer proceeding with design.
yeah,
I'll hear about the
and
grant.
wait for the grant results.
Maybe I can just say, because we don't have quorum for Cove Bay, so can I just have the Cliff people vote on that, please?
The members of the Eagle Cliff Water System Local Advisory Committee recommend that council direct staff to defer proceeding. Do you want a recommendation to defer proceeding or that we wait till the results of the grant before proceeding?
That's
Until subsequent to the grant announcement.
the rest.
Yeah,
Of the
okay.
sentence.
Okay, well, yeah,
I thought that's already captured. Improvement work until fall 2021, subsequent to grant announcement.
It's
Yeah.
captured, Tim, but to get a vote is like, it's captured and official and.
Yeah, understood. I was just
Okay.
looking at
So much
Allison. I thought
different.
Allison was saying.
well,
it
I
wasn't.
was just turning the wording around to be more positive.
Oh, I see. Now I get it.
Yeah, but anyhow, that's fine. It does it. So Tim, you need to call for a vote from the Eagle Cliff members that are present.
So do we have to make a motion that
Yeah.
So we move this. Do we have a seconder? Okay, Glenn, all those in favor? Hands up.
Aye.
Aye, so that's it. We're there. Good.
Okay,
Carried unanimously.
thanks. I think that's all we need then. And Steph will make a list of all the questions and work to be done and circulate it to everybody. Don't kill me.
And then you'll have a water system that looks like a.
I think one more thing that's worth clarifying, Tim, in your discussions, you referred to some number, you said $30,000 plus $10,000. I think the numbers for discussion purposes, all of this has to be confirmed, that we talked about at previous Eagle Cliff LAC meetings was something in the order of $20,000 per house for share of the infrastructure plus 10,000 for contribution to the Cove Bay system. That was sort of what those were the magnitude numbers we discussed, and both of those have to be confirmed.
Yeah, I think it was 20 and 10 and 30 was a total. You're right there. And frankly, the numbers that Glen has put together seem to be right in line to support that. To support the 20, the 10 is still the part that, as Marie and I were having the discussions, to be determined.
And when you're considering the value of the Cove Bay water system, there's the new water treatment plant and its value has to be obviously
as does its debt. And as I say, I was using the numbers from Raja's financial report to Cove Bay as the basis. And I don't say that my numbers are accurate. I just say that back of the envelope, that's what I was finding. So.
Well, let's leave it that we will do more work on finalizing and ground truthing all these numbers and the process that has to go through, we have to go through legally as well.
Agreed.
Okay. Can I adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
All right, motion, meeting adjourned.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.